Hi everyone, and welcome to this new video on the Thoth Emperor. So in the last video I talked about the Empress and we unravelled a fair amount of alchemy in that card, and we're going to do the same again in her consort, which is the Emperor. So these cards have very different colorations. Traditionally the Empress was associated purely with the female and the Emperor with the male, but I do like to discourage that. And as we can see in society today, that people are just a blend of both qualities. So the red coloration in the Emperor is to do with its astrological association of Mars in Aries. The two cards do have similarities. The Empress has the shape of holding a baby here, and also this represents alchemical salt, whereas the Emperor has a specific stance on his throne, which is representative of sulfur. And we've also got the two shields here, and we have the pelican on the left here and the Laman flag on the right. And again, both of these are associated with the alchemical process. With the Empress, we're looking at the influence of the moon, and with the Emperor we've got the sun behind him here. So what I'm going to do now I've introduced the Emperor is just go through some of his divinatory meanings, and then we'll have a look at the card in some detail. So looking at the upright divinatory meanings for the Emperor, he represents someone taking on responsibility for others, such as a family situation. So other people rely on him or her for a large part of their security, their finances. He represents a natural leader and organizer working from a point of fairness with others, and that is one of the higher qualities of being a good emperor. He represents someone who prefers being their own boss and a leader of others rather than a follower. If you're currently having some problems in your life, the Emperor encourages you to take responsibility for this situation, breaking down these problems into smaller, manageable chunks and work systematically through them. If we look at what the Emperor as a definition means, Emperor means he who sets in order. So in other words, it's producing an order to your world and in a form that you can manage, and that is a way of breaking down larger problems. So he seems to symbolize someone who has lived through many life lessons, being an older figure. It could be a young person with a mature head, and this person can use that knowledge and life experience to help others and themselves. And he also represents success through self-discipline and application, thinking in a logical and rational way. With respect to the reverse divinatory meanings, it can indicate someone who's maybe not sticking to their goals and have really applied the necessary focus and discipline to see those goals through, or being under the influence of an overly dominant figure who stifles your creativity. So this may relate to a partner which is overbearing and possessive. The Emperor also can relate to your relationship with your father. So if it's reversed, then it could mean, this dynamic with a father or a parental figure is somewhat awkward. Over-intellectualizing a situation, lack of ambition and direction. Also could indicate someone wanting to break free from a situation which has tied you to rules and regulations. So this relates to an emperor or ruler who basically rules by just dominating others and not allowing others to fully express themselves. So you might like to express yourself more openly, perhaps by becoming self-employed, changing a relationship, changing a work dynamic. looking at your spiritual path from the point of view of what you can get, because remember this is reversed, and the spiritual path is all about giving and surrender. And similar to this one up on the top here, someone who's over-controlling and dominant could also indicate someone cruel, violent, insecure, or suppressing your feminine and softer side. So those are some of the divinatory meanings of the Emperor. We'll now move on to the symbolism and deeper aspects of the card. As you can see from this summary here, there's a fair bit to go through, so we'll work our way through this next. In the last video I talked about the mythology behind the Empress and Emperor and related them to Venus and Mars. So the Empress is Venus or Aphrodite, and the Emperor is Mars, who was the god of war. And Venus, the goddess of love, has a passionate affair with Mars. The Emperor, in his highest sense in the world, understands what being a ruler is and what he can change and what he can't change. So his success is based on his ability to know the difference between the two and make wise choices, and we have to apply that really in our own lives. It's controlling that which we can have an impact on those situations which may be adversely affecting us. So to remain in power, the Emperor must meet the needs of others as well as his own. And he's the fourth card in the sequence of the Major Arcana, which represents the number 4, representing stability and security. So the lesson for the Emperor is that in order to conquer, you must also serve. And you must also be a father to any offspring. Now what that means is, well as in a worldly sense in terms of taking responsibility for children, it also means being responsible for your actions in the world which have consequences. So we're talking about karma on all sorts of different levels. And we need to try and make sure that what we create in our world is of the highest possible virtue. So if we look at the Rider-Waite Emperor, he has the same sort of principles there. He sits upon a large stone throne. You've got mountains in the background. It's actually quite a barren looking background, and you've got the ram's heads on the throne here and on the top here. So again, this represents Mars in Aries. He holds the Egyptian Ankh in his right hand, which is a symbol of life, and in the left hand he has an orb representing his rulership over the world. So very similar in the overall theme to the Thoth Emperor. So we'll now have a look at the relation of the Emperor to the Tree of Life. The Emperor occupies a different position on the Tree of Life according to Crowley. Initially, the Emperor occupied the path that the star is now on, shown in this diagram, an updated diagram of the Tree of Life, occupying the position of or between Hokmar and Tippereth. So the Emperor initially occupied this path, and that was represented in the card here, where we have the light or wisdom of Hokmar coming down through his staff, and this is like in his heart or chest area here, representing Tippereth, which is like his highest centre. But through telepathic communication, I think while he was out in Egypt, he got the message that this position of the Emperor here has to be swapped with the star. So he's further down on the Tree of Life, and he occupies a position between Netzach and Yesod here. So Netzach is ruled by Venus, which links him in with the Empress, who's also ruled by Venus, relating to emotions, enjoyment, pleasure, bliss, that sort of thing. And Yesod relates to the astral and is the final filter through which the main forces of the Tree of Life are organised before being manifest in the universe here. If we look at if we relate that to the Tree of Life to the chakra system here, that's similar to this sexual root chakra, or our identity here. So how does this relate to the meaning of the Emperor now? Well, it gives him a different emphasis, because what it's really saying is that he has to control the lower nature here, and redirect that force upwards to higher centres on the tree of life. And if we look at what Kundalini yogis do, they are redirecting the sexual or root energy and turning that upwards through the spine, out through the crown chakra here. And that's in relation to like Kundalini energy. And also, I've got to say, it's a different path here. It's path 18, the path of natural intelligence. Natural means those vital, those life forces and the intelligence of those. And that relates to, again, the basic sort of sexual life force that we talked about with regards to these two sephira here. So how does it relate to the Emperor in a reading? Well, it could mean, and this is just one example, say for instance if someone is asking about a relationship, it could mean that that relationship is maybe based too much around the physical and the couple reacting to each other emotionally, perhaps in a destructive way, and it's encouraging them to like move away from that and just redirect that energy to get to know themselves and communicate on a different level, to make basically to open up their communications and to change their situation. So that's just one way in which its position on the tree of life can relate to its divinatory meaning. So we'll look at the Hebrew association next. Next we look at the Hebrew association of the Emperor. We've also got the Astrological association of Aries here. The Hebrew association is Sadi. Initially this was done before the Hebrew alphabet started, it was done in pictograph form, and it's supposed to represent a man on his side. It looks more like a spermatozoa to me, but there you go. Which in turn, the man on its side is like simulates like desire or need, like to be rescued. When the Hebrew alphabet proper came into being, the shape of the Hebrew attribution here, Sadi, was said to represent a fishhook. So how does this relate to the meaning of the Emperor? Well, fishing is used as a metaphor in daily life for the searching for information, often into the unknown. It can describe the act of meditation in which we're searching for answers. When we close our eyes, we're in the dark, and we're searching into our spiritual nature in the depths of the waters of the divine. And so this is how the two can be linked in together. As we can see from this summary diagram, there is a fair bit of symbolism to get through, so we'll start straight away. Just to go with the star with 16 points on the end of the throne here, the number 16 relates to the atomic number of sulfur, as we can see in the periodic table, and I've gone around each of the points just to make sure that there were in fact 16 there, because the Emperor does represent sulfur alchemically. The shape of his legs and arms represents this glyph of sulfur. We'll start at the top here and we'll take a look at this crown. There are actually 4 points to the crown, and it looks as if there are more, but it's the rays of the sun that are confusing that. So it's this darker point here. And also, if we look at the crown in greater detail, we can also see that it has jewels with 4 facets on, and we have to assume that there's another jewel on the other point of the crown here. So the number 4 represents Hesed on the tree of life. And this is the builder of the beginnings of form. It's the organizer as the energy comes from Binar. So we're starting to get the beginnings of structure within the universe. And this is the number 4 that we talked about, in the sense that it's the number 4 in terms of the sequence of the major arcana. Indeed, his legs here form the number 4. So there's like a 4 shape here, representing that stability, that security that the Emperor potentially offers, and also his ability to structure his world and that of others for the greater good. The Sephiroth Hesed is also related to Jupiter, and we can see him here in a very similar position of power to the Emperor, which we saw above. So the next thing on our list is the Maltese cross with the orb. And we saw, I'll just bring the image up, we saw this particular combination in the headdress of the Empress, and I talked about that in that particular card. And he holds this Maltese cross and the orb over his navel chakra, and this is the procreative center, and it symbolizes his creativity, his energy, and his ability to govern, and that energy is directed upwards, as I said. The Maltese cross is the balance of the 4 elements. So it's encouraging him to create a world with balance and therefore harmony. Looking more closely at the Emperor's garment, he has bees here which represent industriousness, energy, that type of energy that a leader needs. Bees are also very organised, and so it represents his ability to organise and structure his life and structure that of others. So very much to do with leadership and organisation. And we've got these looping lines here terminating in an arrowhead. And that really means he's directing his energy into a specific focus, working on that which needs changing for the good and leaving alone that which he cannot change, which I think I mentioned at the beginning. We have this scepter here with the ram's head, and that is redirecting or bringing the light or wisdom down from on high into his sort of Christ center here. The right hand is associated with spirituality, the left is to do with the world. So it's ironic that he's bringing like this energy down in its highest form, in its spiritual form, and governing in the world in relation to that energy which he is in touch with. So we can see, even with an emperor who would look a very traditional worldly person, we've still got lots of spirituality going on in this card, and indeed alchemy, which we'll talk about in a minute. We've got these fleur-de-lis, which we again saw in the previous card, the Empress. And this was a symbol of rulership from the French monarchy in a particular period of time, period of history. And again, this would indicate rulership. And we've got the same pattern here on the top here. So the fleur-de-lis occur at the bottom of the card here, similar to what they did in the Empress, where we see them down at the bottom of the card here. This is how the Emperor relates to alchemy. You can see that the symbolism in the card of the Emperor relates to the glyph of sulfur, which I think I briefly mentioned, whereas with the Empress she was related to salt. And obviously Crowley studied extensively different forms of religion and philosophies here, and we've got the Hindu gunas here, in correspondence to the alchemical elements. Sulfur is seen as the active part of nature, that which stimulates salt, and this maintains the equilibrium of the universe. The sulfur is supposed to be masculine, active, fiery, and a vehicle for the manifestation of energy into form. Hence the links with the Sephiroth Hesed, which I talked about. I've also discussed the scepter here, and again that's bringing light. Probably best to show you on a different. The scepter is like forming a conduit for the light and energy and wisdom from the sun, a spiritual sun, going through him. And we talked about with it going in the navel region. But it also shines a light on this shield here, whereas the lamb and flag here is in darkness, or most of it is in darkness. So quite like where the Empress, in the Empress you saw the separation out between the pelican on the left and the shield on the right. So we've got the same principle here, where we've got the shield on the left hand side of the card, representing the new eon of Horus, alchemical principles receiving light from above, and the old eon of Osiris, which is in darkness, and the lamb of sacrifices, to do with the sort of outdated Christianity and its literal interpretation of the Bible. So taking that into a diagram similar to how I did with the Empress here, we've got the Emperor, which is the sulfur here, and we've got the purified red tincture, the double-headed eagle here with the red disc between the beaks, and the lamb and flag. And alchemically this is the dross, which is a part that you discard, and this is like discarding old ideas that are no longer serving us. Whereas with Crowley, he's updating spirituality and philosophy according to the time. The golden eagle with two heads is similar to the phoenix and has like that regenerative quality, and which basically means like renewal, which is associated with like a renewed consciousness once the light of spirit falls upon you. The red disc indicates the purified red tincture, which is analogous to gold. And in the Empress we saw, I'll get the diagram up. We saw the here between the beaks of the eagle we have the outline of the moon, and the moon is related to silver. So in the two cards we've got the silver and gold of alchemy, which are the useful, or would be the useful product of an alchemical reaction, and both of those have like the dross taken out of them so that they are the purified version of what we want. So this relates to purification of the soul. That's what the highest part of alchemy is all about. So I think that's it really for the symbolism. There's a fair bit there. Hopefully that has made it a little clearer on what's happening. I'll just talk a little bit now about the transition between the Emperor and the Empress. The Thoth Emperor symbolises leadership, responsibility, self-control, discipline, focus, those sorts of qualities. Looking back at the previous sequence of the major arcana, we've set out our spiritual path goals with the Magus, connected with the soul in the Priestess, tasted the spiritual love inside with the Empress, and the Emperor suggests that we take responsibility for our life and our actions, both in the world and on our spiritual journey. So the Emperor is not really about shrinking violets. And the same goes with any spiritual path, really, that we must take responsibility for what we are asking Spirit to reveal to us. And this is where the sacrifice of the Emperor comes in, because just as we need to surrender inside to something bigger, so the Emperor must sacrifice for the good of his people. So we'll now move on to the final section of the video, which is to do with divination in relation to the Emperor and the Celtic cross. With the Emperor in position 1 here, the heart of the situation, or the dominant energy of the spread, it could be asking, have you got control of your life and the direction it's heading? And the rest of the cards will indicate the forces pulling it in one direction and another. But it's also about taking on responsibility for your life and your spiritual path. In a more worldly sense, it could even, if someone is asked about their relationship with their other half or their parents, and therefore that brings this into focus. Or, if it's to do with family situations, then it could be a parental figure that is the dominant theme that runs through the particular situation in hand. Card number 2, the Emperor being the crossing card, the current challenge affecting your issue could be that you're really just not structuring your time and goals well enough. Life's become a bit chaotic, need to break life down into more manageable chunks. If in a spiritual context, you need to sacrifice yourself more, take responsibility. And if it's in a relationship setting, then obviously that is possibly to do with interference and dominance from someone like a male figure. Subconscious influences here, position number 3, could mean that we feel protective over others and take on the parenting role in order to help them. That can occur in a relationship or just in most of the relationships in our daily world, that we just have this sort of parental need of protecting people. Position number 4, recent past, it could be a period of discipline and hard work, or it could mean the significance of, let's say, a male figure in the past which our life has been centered around. If it's a relationship, it could mean, the ending of that relationship, or even just the fact that this person has been central to our life and very important and supportive up until the current situation. If the card was indeed reversed, then you'd be looking at more like a negative influence, such as the ending of a relationship or a dysfunctional relationship, that sort of thing. But it's upright, so we get a lot of the positive benefits of this card. Next we have the Emperor in position number 5, representing our hopes and goals. This might relate to being your own boss, being self-employed, free from the negative influence of others, or even wishing to become a parent. Depends on the nature of the question asked and the other cards in the spread. And position number 6, there we go, our short-term future, the need to focus on a task in hand and organise your time effectively to achieve it. So if a situation seems too big to handle, break it down into manageable tasks. Card number 7, how we're affecting our situation, or it can relate to our self-image here. So this brings along the qualities of being organised and efficient, being a leader, being goal-orientated, and it could be we're just applying that to the task in hand and the situation in hand. How others see you, I've reversed the card here just to give a reverse meaning. Could mean that sometimes people see us as being overly dominant and controlling, so that may be due to insecurities that we have, or perhaps being inflexible. The Emperor in position number 9, which is traditionally to do with guidance, advice, warning. Forgot to colour this bit in. They need to be balanced while working on your goals, otherwise life will become barren, like the background of the Rider-Waite card, which is here. It's a rather barren thing that he rules over. So not to over-intellectualise things, learning to sacrifice your time for the benefit of others, to make sure what you create is potentially for the benefit of all, which relates to karma. It's too big to go into, but just, actions have consequences, and life on a spiritual path is about service. Final one now. So finally, the Emperor in position number 10, overall outcome, material security, stability, achieving your goals through hard work and focused effort, learning to surrender in meditation or your spiritual practice, and by giving, we receive more back. So that's the end of this video. Just some hints on how to approach this card from my point of view. There are, each card can take up months of study. They're that involved, but hopefully this helped.